So we left off talking about the lymphatic capillaries and how the lymphatic system is similar to the circulatory system in the sense that we do have capillaries there. Not only do we have capillaries, but we do have valves. We have valves that are going to preventing backflow of lymph, you know, backwards away from the heart. Because remember, the key thing about the lymphatic system is to drain the fluids in your tissues that get leaked out of the capillaries, right, from your blood vessels. And it's going to basically return it back into the pulmonary area of your circulatory system. And usually it's through various lymphatic ducts, such as the ones near your jugulars. And I'll show you about those in a moment. But as I suggested, oh, not suggested, I told you guys the other day, there's backflow being prevented. Okay, and as the interstitial pressure increases, the space between the cells open up, allowing fluid to enter. So the reason why fluid actually enters the lymphatic capillaries because there's a buildup of interstitial pressure due to a buildup of fluids. So the buildup of fluids is going to increase pressure, and this increased pressure is going to allow this fluid to be transferred over into the lymphatic capillaries, and then from lymphatic capillaries is going to go towards the lymphatic vessel, and then it gets transported. Okay, and in the small, and now I put it as a side note because we just learned recently about the the gastrointestinal system. But in the small intestines, your lymphatic capillaries are called lacteals, and they are critical for the transport of dietary lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins to the bloodstream. Okay, so they're kind of like a highway of some sorts for lipids also. Okay, not only for, and I mentioned yesterday that they're also kind of a highway for white blood cells, such as immunological based cells, such as macrophages, dendritic cells, and also neutrophils. It's another example. So, anyways, chyle. So, chyle itself. So, the mixture between lipids and lipid soluble vitamins and also proteins is going to be the mixture of that is going to become chyle, and chyle is that that phase of liquid, that mixture of liquid that exists in lymph. Okay, and in lymph. All right, that's just a definition. All right, now if you want, take a look at this picture here. So there's a reason why I put this picture here. It's because I want to show you, okay, how close the actual capillaries from your blood vessels. So you have the capillaries over here, right? So you have the capillaries over here, all right? And then around this, all this orange, whitish cell. This is all your tissue cells, okay? And your capillaries here around your tissue cells, they start to leak out because they're kind of leaky due to the high pressure. They leak out some fluids that get stuck in the tissues, right? So you're gonna have a buildup of interstitial fluids. The green here represents the lymphatic capillaries and just generally lymphatic vessels, okay? They actually intertwine and around where the capillary blood vessels are, and they're going to suck up basically all that leaked out interstitial fluid. And you can actually see over here. So if you look closely in this zoomed in picture here, you see these gaps over here. So these gaps are where it's kind of where the leakage kind of happens. But I also want you to understand a few things here, okay? This the high pressure for the interstitial fluid is going to allow it to push through the lymph, the lymphatic vessel here, and enter the lymph. Okay, and it's going to be the interstitial fluid. Gotta move this stuff away from me. So it's going to become part of the interstitial fluid of from the from the exterior environment. Okay, because remember over here, this like area around the green over here, that's where your tissue cells, and that's going to have the accumulation of tissue fluid. It's going to come inside the lymph, okay? The lymph vessel, all right? Now, one thing I want you to remember too, okay? I may ask a question on this, I'm not quite sure yet, but know that the collagen fiber over here is going to be essential for holding everything together. It's a scaffold, okay, for your the lymph vessel, okay? The reason why the lymph vessel here could be holstered like this is because of the collagen fibers. Without the collagen fibers, it's going to be too loose, okay? and it won't stay together physically. So that's all I need you guys to know about this. Okay. So let's talk about other types of lymphatic vessels. So I told you we have the capillaries, then goes to the vessels, and then there's something that it ends up going into. Okay. You have something called trunks. Okay. You have something called lymphatic trunks, which are just larger lymphatic vessels. Okay. Now we have various amounts of trunks throughout the whole body. I'm going to name a few of them to you guys. Okay. Now the fluid in our vessels and the lymphatic vessels, they go to various trunks depending on where in the body it's coming from. Okay. And it's usually divided by the right and left side of the body. But you could see here, so the right side of the body, okay, the fluids from the lymphatic vessels are going to come from here. Okay, this is how you divide it. Okay, it's coming from your right arm and your right thoracic, right side like this. Okay, and then you're going to have the left side. And the left side is going to have multiple trunks because it covers a larger area. Okay, now the two trunks you need to know for sure. I mean, I'm going to tell you which trunks you need to know, but two of them, of the two, okay, two of them right now are your right and left jugular lymphatic trunks. Okay, the right, the right and left. So and they're actually by your subclavian vein. Okay, they're right where your jugulars would be. Okay, so you can see over here, zoomed in a picture over here on both sides. Okay, these are these are two trunks. Okay, and that's where the ducts are located. Okay, those are two ducts. All right, I should be more specific actually here. So the way it works is, let me actually type it in the PowerPoint so you guys could see better. I don't want to write it out. You're going from capillaries. Let's spell. Going from capillaries, right? Then you're going to go to the normal lymphatic vessel. And after that, you go to the lymphatic trunk. It's larger vessel, right? And after the lymphatic trunk, you're going to go to something called lymphatic ducts. And this is where the lymph is out into dumped out back into the circulatory system. Okay, so this is important. I want you guys to know this. Okay, just get that in red. So I want you guys to write this on your notes down. Okay, it's going to be tested. It's going to be. I'm going to ask you a question about this. Okay, now back into the picture here. Okay, so the trunks connects to the duct. Okay, now you have various trunks and ducts depending on where in the body you have. Okay, you have over here. Where is it here? You have your thoracic ducts over here. Now your thoracic ducts is going to come from your left side of the body. Okay. The right lymphatic duct over at your right jugular vein is going to be from the right duct. So that's your right duct. Okay, and it's going to come from the right uh, subclavian trunk. Okay, and over here, so down over here, the cisterna chyli. Okay, the cisterna chyli duct. Okay, it's a thoracic duct. Okay, this is going to be collecting or at least exiting out all the fluids it's received from the abdominal area as well as the lower extremities. Okay, so your two legs, the all the fluid in your two legs up until your abdominal area. Okay, all of that fluid that's going to be collected by the lymphatic system there is going to be deposited outside back into the circulatory system via the cisterna chyli of the thoracic duct. Okay, it all goes back up there. All right. Now, as you go up further, okay, up into the left side, further up the left side, I'm talking about over here, like your right, your left subclavian, where your left clavicle is. That's going to be dumped into the left subclavian jugular, that area, okay, right over here. Okay, it's going to dump everything into there. Okay. And then if for the right side, it just the reflected side of it, okay? And the right side, it'll just be the right jugular vein, okay? So the jugulars, guys, is where all the fluids eventually return, okay? All right? It's going to enter the duct, and the duct is then going to deposit everything into the jugulars. All right? Let me just actually just type this up for you guys here too. Ducts then transfers the blood, no, the lymph into the circulatory system via by the jugular. And then the side is dependent on this picture. Okay, so I want you to make sure that you could orientate yourself on this picture. Okay, you learn how to do this in anatomy. Oop, too big. Okay. So make sure you get these notes. All right, I just typed up. Okay, make sense to everyone so far? All right. So make sure the ducts, once it gets in the ducts then is going to be able to transport it into the blood vessel. Okay. And specifically talking about the jugulars. Okay. Because remember, the first place you're going to want to return all this fluid back into is the place nearest to your heart, right? And your jugulars, the jugular vein, the way it's going to be, the flow of blood is pretty close to your heart, right? All right. So make sure you got these notes, all right? Okay, so let's talk about what some of the primary lymphoid organs, and this is very, very, very like summary based. I'm not going into great detail because of time constraint. Okay, this particular chapter we don't usually cover too much in intro to physiology, so this is kind of something new they added, uh, but it's still pretty easy. So anyway, so some of the primary lymphoid organs. Okay, the first big one is your bone marrow, and the second big one is your thymus gland. Okay, let me go back up here. Let me actually zoom in. Okay, so actually you can see it. You can actually see it. So do you see this over here, guys? This brown color over here? And you actually do see, and you remember the mink. You saw it's like brown kind of it looks kind of fatty. Not really fatty, but it was kind of it was that the little flap that you removed when you dissected the mink and tried to remove the heart. Does everyone remember that? That would be your thymus gland. And your thymus gland is very important for maturation of your T cells. Okay, so we'll talk about that right now, actually. So that's a little preview. Okay, so the primary lymphoid organs are the bone marrow and the thymus gland. Okay, now lymphocytes. Now lymphocytes, guys, this is referring to things like B cells and T cells. Okay, so lymphocytes, such as B cells and T cells, they're going to be maturing, proliferating, and selected in both of these different organs. Okay. Now, you'll see soon enough for B cells, all three of these steps, maturation, that means specification, it's specializing into whatever into the function it's going to have. Proliferation means it's going to divide there, okay? And selected means that only the good, perfect cells that have no mutations, no problem, okay, are going to be selected and transported outside, okay? They're going to put set on the side so that you're going to be able to use those. If you're not selected, if a lymphocyte isn't selected, you actually break it down because it's going to be harmful to the body. Okay, so if you have an issue, if a person has an issue with selection of lymphocytes, this person is likely to actually produce like to let free out into your system immunological cells like mutated B cells and T cells that could attack your own cells. So that would be an autoimmune disorder potentially. Okay, if you lose the ability to select good versus bad lymphocytes. Okay, and there are actually a lot of fail safes into this. I'm not going to go into great detail because that's like a whole that on its own is like a few lectures. But just know that in these two organs, especially for the for the T cells in the thymus gland, okay, when they are selected, they're looking for your system is checking to make sure that it's not reacting with your own cells. And in this the summarized method to do that is basically your system actually presents it presents antigens that your own body made, and it's antigens for your own cells, and to see if the newly made T cells or B cells are either sensitive or resistant to that antigen, okay? If the B and T cells actually connect to the receptor and have a reaction with those antigens, that means that if it gets released out into your system, it's gonna it's gonna be reflected as an autoimmune disorder, okay? It's gonna start attacking your own cells, all right? So during this process, it actually gets rid of those cells during selection. If it sees that it reacts with those antigens, it gets rid of it, okay? That's why it's important to prevent autoimmune disorders, okay? Everyone understands? Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So the first primary organ we're going to talk about briefly is your bone marrow, okay? Now the bone marrow is a location where hematopoiesis occurs. Now, if you remember hematopoiesis, if you just look at the word, okay, this is going to be the differentiation of red blood cells, okay? This is where red blood cells are coming from the stem cells, the pluripotent stem cells, and gets specified to become red blood cells. So this is where it happens, okay? And specifically in the bone marrow, it's the red bone marrow, okay? Specifically the red bone marrow, okay? Now, yellow bone marrow is a site. Now we have different colors, okay? Yellow bone marrow is a site of energy storage with adipose cells. So I don't know if you've heard of this one, but I don't know if you've heard of yellow tissue, white fat, brown fat, that kind of thing. It comes from this, okay? Now this is going to be a site of storage for adipose cells, meaning fat cells. So it's made up of lipids. Okay, it's storing lipids. All right. Now B cells, okay, the entire like I said before, the three steps: maturation, proliferation, and selection. Everything for B cells occurs in the red bone marrow. Okay, all right. The T cells, on the other hand, okay, will undergo proliferation and a little bit of maturation, but the huge bulk of maturation and also final selection occurs in the thymus gland. Okay. Now there is some selection that occurs in the bone marrow for T cells too, but most of that stuff occurs in the thymus gland. Okay, so the thymus gland is really important for getting your T cells ready for action. Okay, thymus gland is a bilobed organ. Okay, it's found, and I already showed you where it is. Okay, it's right above the heart, right? It's like covering the top part of the heart. All right, I already showed you guys that, and that's here we go. Here's a nicer picture of this fatty looking uh, tissue over here. Okay, so that's your thymus gland. Okay, so it's covering the top portion of your heart, and inside it, you do have a lot of immune cells, immunological cells, which makes sense, right? It's part of your immune system, right? So you're going to see things like, I should just get my indentation out. You can see things like macrophages, dendritic cells, okay? These are two different types of cells that are going to be common in your innate immune system, all right? And also the macrophages, by the way, and I'll mention this later on, the macrophages, their primary the first place you see them is in your innate immune system, but you'll also see them in the adaptive immune system. They work in both parts of your immune system, but they're really in the innate. They're one of the primary um, defenses against everything. Okay, and we'll get into a little more detail on that shortly. All right. Now, let's get rid of this marker. All right. All right. So there's gonna be other organs here you're gonna need to know, like the spleen. Now, I'll talk about that in a bit, but the spleen, for example, and you can see here that they actually label the spleen out of all the other organs. They label the spleen. The spleen is going to be a secondary lymphoid organ, and I'll talk about that in a second. Let me see here. Dendritic. Oh, they're a little bit different, Carolina. They're actually named the same. They're not neurons. No, actually, I just did it. I'm doing you guys a disservice right now. Let me show you a picture of one. Let me show you a picture of one. Oops, come on. Come on, internet. There you are. Let me just give me a second. You want to see why they're called dendritic cells. See if I can find a good picture of them. Oh, come on. This is okay. Yeah, here we go. All right, I'm gonna switch sharing to screen share quickly. It is a good question, Carolina. It is actually a good question. All right. Do you guys see that? Yeah. What does that remind you of? It reminds you of a neuron, right? It looks, here's another picture. You got some really cool pictures here. Let's see here. Look at this one. This is a 3D image. Yeah, these are dendritic cells. They're not neurons. They're immunological cells. They actually function to protect your body from foreign invaders. That's why they got the word dendritic cell because it looks very similar to that. Here's a well, this is more detailed. This picture this is actually the biochemistry behind this is pretty detailed, but this is showing you how dendritic cells is going to be involved in fighting against cancer cells. Like you get this is part of immunotherapy. This picture. Obviously, there's a tangent, guys. You don't need to know this for the exam or anything like that. But you could see this picture is showing is it's part of a paper, okay? That they're showing you that one of the things you can do is for to treat cancer is immunotherapy. And immunotherapy, you're taking advantage of your various immunological cells, right? Different types of cells in the immune system. It could be your macrophages, it could be your uh, dendritic cells, your B cells, T cells, and they all work together kind of to fight off against just your cancerous cells, right? And then leaving alone your healthy cells. Okay. Is that interesting or what? Give me a second just to pull back up the PowerPoint. All right, there we go. All right. Yeah, that's a good question, Carolina. That's a very good question. Um, yeah, scientists they kind of stink at making names, to be honest. They don't think too far ahead of themselves. Uh, so yeah. So anyway, so let's talk about. So those are the only primary lymphatic organs I need you guys to know in that amount of detail. I'm not gonna ask you just like super detailed stuff, right? Whatever's on these slides is what you have to know, okay? And actually, the way I made these slides is to so that it kind of narrows down what exactly you need to know. So, for example, I'm not going to give you a review specifically for this slide, right? I wouldn't give you a review for this slideshow because everything on this slideshow you need to know, okay? I cut off things that you don't need to know. All right, so let's talk about lymphatic or secondary lymphatic organs, and we have quite a few of them, okay? And I actually summarized really nicely the things you need to know for each of them, okay? The first one is your lymph nodes, okay? And the primary function for lymph nodes is to remove debris and pathogens from the lymph, okay? And we have several, and the nodes are all over our body, okay? We have them sporadically around, like for example, our armpits, right? Armpits is an area, okay? That's a good area that you'll see a lot of lymph nodes. So spleen, okay, it's attached to our stomach, all right, has extensive vascular, so it's highly vascularized, all right, has a large amount of macrophages and dendritic cells, which will function to remove materials from blood, such as dying red blood cells and microbes. Now, I have to be very clear on this with you guys, okay? Macrophages, especially macrophages, okay, their purpose isn't only to remove microbes. They also gonna phagocytose inside dead cells, okay? Because remember, you don't want to leave dead cells floating around your body. You want to get rid of it. So macrophages will actually also phagocytize those dead cells and break them down due to various enzymes it has inside of it, okay? Uh, but of course, for the purpose of this particular system, we're going to be focusing on microbes, right? Microbes and also viruses, right? Um, bacteria, viruses, both of them together. They want to get rid of all that bad stuff. Okay. Now, the next one is called a lymphoid nodule. Okay. The lymphoid nodule is your tonsils. Okay. And it's very important for developing immunity towards oral pathogens. Okay. Uh, when you get a little bit older, sometimes you may get your tonsils removed, right? And getting your tonsils removed is because it gets inflamed, right? You're gonna have some issue with that. It gets overly inflamed and it's obstructive to your everyday lifestyle, so they could remove it for you in the hospital. Uh, it doesn't have, from my knowledge, it doesn't have any negative adverse effects because once you've already developed your immunity towards these set of microbes, okay, you have it already for the rest of your life. All right. Now you may later on in life you may take some booster shots, depending, just to keep your B cells, your memory B cells active, right? Make sure that you're making some more antibodies, making sure your everything's working well. Okay. Now that's all you need to know. Okay, for that, I basically just gave you guys the direct definition of what I need you guys to know. All right, because there's a lot more there's a lot more to it, but this is really the gist of it. All right. Then we have two different ones. We have the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue, aka MALT. Okay, and this is really good for fighting against ingested substances. Okay. Then we have the bronchus associated lymphoid tissue, BALT, which is really good against fighting against inhaled pathogens in addition to your tonsils, okay? And this is actually the reason why, one of the reasons why you can remove your tonsils when you get a little bit older, like when you're maybe in, you know, I don't know how young people. I mean, you could be like pre-adolescent child that gets their tonsils removed, right? But one of the reasons why is because your bronchus associated lymphoid tissue could uh, bring up the slack. They could work a little bit harder. Okay. All right. So that's basically it. Is everyone clear on these different organs? This is pretty concise and to the point. There's no dilly-dally here, right? Okay, great. All right. So we're done with the lymphatic, the actual talking about the actual lymphatic system, but now we're going to be talking about the immune system. Okay. Now, the immune system, by definition, it's a very dry definition. Okay, it's a collection of barriers, cells, and soluble proteins that interact to communicate with each other in extraordinarily complex ways. Okay. Now, the way they communicate with one another is typically to fight off foreign invaders that are harmful to your body, right? So, and usually it's going to be some kind of microbe, bacteria or virus, right? Now, the immune system, like I mentioned various times, is split into the innate and adaptive immune systems, okay? And these two work together to maintain our livelihood, okay? That's the purpose, all right? That's the reason why you have the both of them. We're gonna talk about the innate and the adaptive immune system in a little bit of detail, okay? Not extensive detail, because it'll take a whole semester, just, nearly a whole semester just to talk about those two in detail, right? So, the first things first, just like most cells, okay, a lot of cells they come from a multipotent stem cell, okay, and they differentiate multiple times into more specific types of cells, okay, and such as erythrocytes, which are your red blood cells, okay, platelets is another one that's all the way down to the lower left over here, right? Platelets, red blood cells, some basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils. These are types of leukocytes, okay? They have also monocytes, which will become macrophages. Okay. Then, of course, you have the lymphoid stem cells, which then becomes natural killer cells. Okay. All right. You have types. You have a T lymphocyte, B lymphocyte, which are your B and T cells. Okay. So this is kind of showing you the kind of the schematic, okay, of different types of immunological cells and where they come from. Okay. Now, for the extent on this particular slide, what I want you, what I could test you guys on, it's just, the categories, okay? What does a monoblast give, right? What do myeloblasts gives? Okay, so what I want you guys to know here, I'm just going to circle them right now, okay? For sure know what multipotens means, okay? This is the most undifferentiated stem cell, okay? It could become anything, okay? It's like a baby, right? It could become anything, right? Then it gets split into two things. It could be a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell, but don't worry about these, okay? Worry about these right here. The megakaryoblast. Megakaryoblast are going to become they're going to become platelets. Oh, what happened to my marker? They're going to become platelets down the road. Okay, so don't worry about this. This, right? Worry about that. Worry about this. Okay. Don't worry about for this chart. Don't worry about this. For the red blood cells, just know that your spleen has your bone marrow has some involvement, okay? With the red bone marrow, just know that. But for this particular chart, don't worry about this, okay? Know these, okay? And then know this for that part, okay? Then for from here, lymphoblast, don't worry about lymphoblast, okay? Just know that actually You know what? Instead of know your lymphoid stem cell. Don't worry about lymphoblast, okay? Instead, that's a little bit more easier to recall, I think. Okay? Know about your natural killer cells, and then know that you get from the small lymphocyte, know that you get your B and T cells, okay? But we'll talk about this more as we in the next couple slides. So let's talk about your innate immune system. Now, the key thing, the key feature of your innate immune system is the fast, non-specific response. Okay, meaning, and actually, your innate immune system is so fast that it's actually perpetually activated at all times. Technically speaking, do you know why it's always activated? Your skin. Okay, mechanical barriers is part of the innate immune system. So your skin, such as your skin, right? Your mucosal linings around your organs, right? Your tissues, those are always there, right? They don't stop. You don't stop shedding, developing skin cells, right? In your life, I know a person does it. You're always producing more skin cells throughout life, right? So it's always active. So your immune system is always active, technically speaking. Okay, but now let's say you get a cut, right? So the first thing that gets recruited and is going to have the fast response is going to be part of the innate immune system, specifically things like macrophages, neutrophils, and natural killer cells. Okay. Now, when you get let's say, some kind of infection, right, or maybe a little cut, right, you're going to start recruiting phagocytes. Okay, and these are the class of cells that are going to be part of the innate immune system. Okay, you're going to be start recruiting macrophages, neutrophils, and natural killer cells. Okay, all right. Now these cells, these three here, they're going to start congregating to the site of infection, and they're going to cause inflammation. Okay, so they're the reason why you get inflammation. All right, the initial inflammation is due to the innate immune system fast response. Okay, all right. Now, and I already mentioned about the physical barriers, about your various internal surfaces, mucosal linings, and as well as your skin, right? So that's part of the innate immune system. But then you also have these three phagocytes, okay? Now, why are they called phagocytes? Well, it's because they actually, quote unquote, eat foreign invaders. They engulf and bring in foreign invaders into their cells, and then they break them down from inside of their own cell within by using various enzymes, okay? So yeah, let's talk about them. Okay, so the first one is macrophages. Now, macrophages are kind of amoeba-like. They don't have a real form or shape. Okay, they have pseudopods. Okay, much like amoebas. All right, they're very similar. Okay, and their form. The reason why they have such a flexible shape is very important for their function. Their flexible shape allows them to squeeze through tissues and capillary walls, okay? So that having a very flexible cell shape, all right, and not a rigid cell that's very stiff, is going to allow it to move more freely throughout your whole body. So it's going to be easier for it to get to the site of infection, okay? Now we have neutrophils. Now neutrophils, the way they actually move, they're going to be attracted by chemotaxis. Now chemotaxis is basically them sensing various chemical concentration gradients that gives them the signal to either go there or not go there. Okay, and usually chemotaxis, when you have an infected tissue, the bacteria or virus, they're gonna release certain chemicals, right? Well, in the case of in bacteria, they release certain toxins, that kind of thing that will influence the chemical gradient. So neutrophils will detect this, okay, and they'll head over to that area to see what's going on, okay. Now neutrophils are granulocytes, okay. They're known as granulocytes, and they're pathogen killing cell of the inflammatory process. So neutrophils during the inflammatory process, they will kill foreign invaders, okay. Now, last but not least, you have your natural killer cells. Now, natural killer cells, they're going to work in a very similar fashion to your cytotoxic T cells, which is part of your adaptive immune system. Now, the reason why they're similar is because they both kill foreign invaders by inducing cell apoptosis. Okay. Now, cell apoptosis is programmed cell death, for those of you who don't know. Okay. We actually do this to ourselves too. Naturally speaking, we have certain processes that will enable cell apoptosis with normal cells. When they get older cells, we're going to induce cell apoptosis, right? To get rid of them because we don't need to keep them. If you keep uh, dying cells or cells that are not good anymore, they could develop. They could be developed into cancer cells. Okay. But for natural killer cells, the primary purpose is to induce this. And the way they induce this is that they have various enzymes which basically pokes holes into the cell wall of bacteria, for example. So the cell wall bacteria is going to be compromised by various enzymes that will basically cut, make little holes, and then by making little holes, then the bacterial cell is going to be very sensitive to any osmotic changes, and that osmotic change will then end up blowing up the cell. Okay, due to the osmotic pressure. Everyone clear so far? Now, this is going to be the summary of everything I just went over. Make sure you memorize this. There's some additional ones. What is a chemotaxis? Oh, chemotaxis is movement is detecting chemical gradients, and based on that chemical gradient is where you would either move towards or move away. Okay, so in the context of neutrophils, they're going to be detecting chemical gradients that would be caused by maybe toxins or byproducts that would be byproducts of a infection by some kind of bacteria or maybe virus, and head towards there to fight off the infection. All right, so for this, guys, just memorize this. All right. We have the skin, so I'll just circle it. I'll just circle what you do know. Know this, okay? I would know sweating. Sweating and secretions will help you too, okay? Oral cavity, your saliva. Remember, guys, your saliva has a lot of enzymes, primarily lysozyme. Lysozyme will help to destroy some bacteria, okay? And I mentioned this before, your stomach, the acidity level of your stomach will also fight off a lot of foreign invaders. A lot of them, most of them don't actually survive in low pH like that. There's only some specialized ones like Helicobacter or Campylobacter jejuni, specifically Helicobacter, right? Mucosal surfaces, like I mentioned. And of course, this is something you learn in microbiology, but your normal flora, meaning the good bacteria, you have bacteria that live in your system, the lining of your gastrointestinal system, for example, such as the good E. coli strains that will fight off they'll help fight off the bad strains of bacteria. All right, we could talk about this. So let's talk about the adaptive immune system, particularly the B cells, okay? Now, the B cells are a type of lymphocyte, okay? And they're immune cells that primarily that function to primarily make antibodies, okay? Now, antibodies are the specific type of proteins that will specifically bind to a antigen that's going to be on the surface of a foreign invader, okay? So, and once it does bind to that, it tags the foreign invader and lets other cells in the immune system know, hey guys, I just tagged the bad guy that's in our system. Okay, that's how they work. All right. They include memory B cells, so that means they memorize previous infections. This is the reason why you gain immunity towards an infection. Okay. Now, B cells, the ones that produce antibodies, they're not called B cells. They're actually called plasma cells. Plasma cells are the matured form of B cells. the fully matured and activated form of B cells that are only activated during a infection, okay, like this. And they're going to be actively secreting antibodies, okay? Now, T cells, they do not secrete antibodies, on the other hand, but they're the ones that will kill the tagged foreign invaders. So remember, antibodies, like I said before, they're going to tag the antigen on the surface of the foreign invader, okay? And this tag is then going to let cells like T cells know that it's time to kill this, okay? Now, the natural killer cells are part of it. They're actually part of it. I mentioned macrophages. Macrophages and natural killer cells are actually part of both the innate and adaptive immune systems, okay? These circulate your blood and they contain cytotoxic granules, okay? Now, this cytotoxicity is going to be similar to your cytotoxic T cells. They're going to act in a similar fashion, all right? So let's talk about quickly T cells, all right? This is very, very short, guys. This is the butt end of this lecture, all right? Now, the immune system's first exposure to a pathogen is called a primary adaptive response, okay? And then the reason why I'm putting this here is because it's relative to adaptive immunity. So the primary adaptive response is when you, for example, let's say you, God forbid, you contract the COVID-19 virus, that would be a primary adaptive response. That means your immune system is trying to figure out what the hell just hit you, okay, in your system, all right? And during that whole process, usually it takes about 2 weeks where you start to gain immunity to it. All right. It's like a 2 weeks procedure. All right. After that, you gain immunity. You're going to gain memory B cells that memorize that infection, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. Right. Now, the secondary adaptive response is, let's say you caught the influenza type A, right? That means if and you get immunity towards it, right? So let's say influenza type A tries to attack you again, right? Like a couple weeks, like 5 weeks after your first infection. I'm just giving you a hypothetical outcome, right? So what happened is your memory B cells already remembers this. So what they're going to do is ahead of time, once they detect this, they can immediately start producing specific antibodies towards it because they already have the specific antibodies that will specifically recognize influenza type A. And once they're tagged, they're immediately tagged. Then the cytotoxic T cells are recruited and they're going to destroy all of them. That's why you don't get sick again for the same thing. Okay. Now we have some types, some subsections of T cells. We have some called helper T cells, and then we have the cytotoxic T cells. Now, there's two types of helper T cells. We have helper T cell type 1 and type 2. Helper T cell type 1 helps the T cell to secrete, they're the type of cells that secrete cytokines, okay? Now, cytokines are going to be important in signaling, like creating a gradient on where to recruit even more T cells, okay? Now, the type 2 T cells are cytokine secreting cells that act on B cells, okay? So these guys, the type 2 T cells, helper T cells, will help B cells do their job, okay? All right. Then last but not least, we have cytotoxic T cells. Cytotoxic T cells are those that actually will are they're like the SWAT team, okay, of your immune cell of your adaptive immune system alongside the natural killer cells, okay? Natural killer cells are going to be your let's say your normal police officer going undercover, and then your cytotoxic T cells are the SWAT team, okay? Or the National Guard. Like it's going to be the higher order um, attack force. Okay, and these are the big boys in the entire immune system. They're the most toxic. They're the most dangerous towards foreign invaders. Okay, so they're going to also induce apoptosis using the same mechanism as natural killer cells. Okay, that's basically it. All right, and this is a summary. All right, this is a summary of your lymphocyte functions. All right, you should know these. Okay. And that's basically it, guys. All right. So that's the last our last lecture for this semester. Now,